You know, it's amazing to think about all the mysteries that are just out there, unsolved cases that have gone cold for like decades.
Mm.
So these stories are just frozen in time, just waiting for someone to come along and, and kind of bring them back to life, thaw them out a little bit.
Mm.
And that's kind of what we're going to be doing today.
Yeah.
As we travel back to 1930s Reno, a city that was full of excitement, but also, a kind of a dangerous underbelly, a lot of risk involved, a lot of promise and a lot of danger, all in the same package.
Yeah, it was a fascinating time, especially for a city like Reno. You had the end of Prohibition, the rise of legalized gambling,
Right.
and then you still had those lingering effects of the Great Depression. So it was
Hmm.
really a melting pot of like societal shifts and unfortunately it also became a breeding ground for organized crime.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine that, like, that clash of like the glamour and the lawlessness. And in the middle of all of this, you have a man who simply vanishes. Roy Pham, a bank cashier, just living his life, pretty ordinary. He disappeared on March 23, 1934, and he left behind a trail of unanswered questions. And it's a mystery that has haunted Reno for almost a century.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that just keeps you thinking. It's
Yeah.
full of twists and turns and we're going to kind of delve into the details of his disappearance, all the weird stuff that happened that night, the suspicious circumstances and how the early investigation unfolded. It's a really wild ride.
So let's unpack this a little bit. Roy Pham, 46 years old, lived a quiet life with his sister. He
Hmm.
wasn't really, known to be involved in anything shady or anything like that. So what on earth could have happened to this guy? What led to his disappearance?
Well, on the surface, Roy's life might seem pretty normal, right? But you got to remember, he was a cashier at the United Nevada Bank, and this bank, it had some connections, some ties to some not so great people.
Ah, so this is where the mob comes into play, right?
Exactly.
I mean, wasn't the bank owned by the Wingfield family who, they had those ties to organized crime?
That's right. The
Oh,
Wingfields were like super powerful in Reno.
yeah.
And their bank, unfortunately, got mixed up with some big time mobsters. We're talking William Graham, James McKay.
Wow.
These guys were running a nationwide operation, sports wire fraud, insider stock trading. They were using the bank to launder money.
It's incredible. So Roy, basically by working at this bank, kind of got caught up in this whole mess. He actually testified against Graham and McKay in 33, the year before he disappeared.
He did.
And that testimony led to their indictment. Talk about pressure, right? This guy's working at this bank, and then he's forced to testify against these powerful mobsters.
You can't even imagine the kind of pressure he must have been under to know that you've crossed these dangerous people. So when he disappeared just a year later, the police, they immediately thought, okay, something's not right here.
Yeah, foul play.
Foul play for sure.
So let's talk about the night he vanished. March 23rd, 1934.
Friday night.
He had dinner at home alone. He went to a movie at the Majestic Theater, saw a film.
Pretty typical.
A pretty normal Friday night, right?
Yeah.
Someone who likes to keep to himself, enjoys the simple things.
Yeah.
But on his walk back home from that theater,
Poof. Vanished.
gone.
Just like that.
And this is where things get really interesting because, like, the police start digging and they uncover all these bizarre details. It's like something straight out of like a detective novel or something. We've got a stolen car, a creepy phone call, even a mysterious guy lurking around Roy's house. It's wild.
Right. Okay. So the stolen car. On the same night Roy disappears, someone in Reno reports their car stolen.
Right.
Later, that car is found abandoned, a little worse for wear, and get this, rope and adhesive tape are missing.
Cool, come on.
You have to wonder, right?
Yeah, what were those for?
What were those items for? I mean, were they used to subdue Roy? It's creepy, right?
Is super creepy.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, Roy's brother overhears this super cryptic phone call the day before he vanishes. Roy's on the phone saying things like, no, I can't do that. He's a friend of mine. I mean, it's like, what is going on?
It's like a scene straight out of a film noir.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all shadowy and mysterious. Who was he talking to? What was he being pressured to do? And does it all tie back to his disappearance? These are questions that have been bugging investigators for years.
Oh, yeah. And then you have this mysterious man seen watching Roy's house the very night he disappears.
Yeah.
Was he just, like casually observing Roy's movements? Or was he, like, waiting for the right moment to make a move?
It's unsettling,
Right.
really unsettling. And when you add that to the stolen car and that cryptic phone call, it makes you think, okay, this wasn't random.
Right.
This was planned. This was premeditated.
Totally. And then there were even more weird sightings. Like, a neighbor reports a visit from a man who seems like he's looking for the wrong house. And another neighbor sees, like, a similar vehicle, but a different person's behind the wheel. It's like, were there multiple people involved here? Were they, like, keeping tabs on Roy's every move?
You start to think, okay, was this a coordinated effort?
Yeah.
Were these guys working together?
Right.
Were they part of something bigger, something orchestrated by the mob? It's hard to say for sure, but the deeper you go, the more suspicious it gets.
Absolutely. And then to make matters even creepier, you've got a firefighter who reports seeing car headlights near, like, an abandoned mine shaft around 11:30 that night.
Ooh.
Makes you wonder if that's where they,
Took him.
yeah.
That abandoned mine shaft became a huge focus in the investigation. I mean, it was isolated, deserted. It was a perfect place to hide a crime. But even after all these extensive searches, they never found anything there, at least not at first.
So we have all these pieces of the puzzle. The stolen car, the phone call, that mysterious man, the abandoned mine shaft.
Mm-hmm.
Are they just random events? Or are they connected somehow?
The police, back then, they definitely thought they were connected.
Yeah.
And they had their eyes on a particular group, Babyface Nelson and his gang.
Now, for our listeners who might not know, organized crime was a huge problem in cities like Reno in the 30s. They were basically running the show in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Casinos, they were influencing law enforcement, you name it.
Power everywhere.
And Babyface Nelson, he was like the poster child for ruthless gangsters. He was violent. He was known to be operating in Reno right around the time Roy disappeared.
It was a huge development when Babyface Nelson became a suspect in this case. He was a dangerous guy capable of anything, and it brought a new level of urgency, a new level of fear to the whole investigation.
You can't help but think, this ordinary bank cashier caught up in the world of organized crime. It's a story that reminds us that danger can be lurking in the most unexpected places, right?
Absolutely. And as the police delved deeper into Roy's disappearance, they started uncovering more and more evidence that pointed toward a really dark truth.
Yeah.
Roy's decision to testify against the mob might have cost him his life.
Wow.
It's heavy stuff.
It is.
We'll be back after the break to explore more about the investigation and what happened next in Roy Froy's case. Stay with us.
So we left off with those investigators, right?
Right.
Zeroing in on Babyface Nelson and his gang. It really makes you think about the audacity of those gangsters, doesn't it? Like just silencing a witness and getting away with it.
It really does. It's a pretty stark reminder of how lawless that era was. Organized crime was really running rampant.
And what's scary is how they had their fingers in everything, right? Even law enforcement, it was like the lines got blurry and it made it so hard to actually bring those criminals to justice.
Yeah, for sure. And in the case of Roy Froy, that struggle for justice was a long one. The police suspected the mob was involved, but they couldn't prove it. Then, a year after Roy vanished, there's this potential breakthrough.
A confession from someone in Babyface Nelson's gang.
I mean, if that's true, that could be huge. That could be the missing link they'd been looking for.
So who spilled the beans? What do they say?
His name was John Paul Chase, and he was doing time in Alcatraz for other crimes. In 1935, he claims he saw Roy get murdered and actually helped to get rid of the body.
Wow. And what did he say happened?
He said they took Roy's body southeast of Reno, buried him in some remote mine shaft.
Oh, wow. So they finally have someone directly connecting Babyface Nelson to Roy's disappearance. Did they find Roy's body?
Well, not exactly. Chase had a reputation for, well, let's just say he liked to tell stories. Investigators thought he might be stretching the truth, maybe hoping to get transferred out of Alcatraz by giving them some juicy information, even if it wasn't all true.
Oh, I see. So his motives were a little suspect, maybe a mix of truth and lies to try and get himself a better deal. What did the police do with that information, though?
Despite their doubts, they still checked out his story, right? They searched the area he described, went through tons of mine shafts, but nothing. No sign of Roy.
It's like a classic unreliable witness situation, right? You get this little bit of information, but you can't be sure how much of it's real. So did the investigation hit a dead end there?
It was a pretty big roadblock. But then there's this other discovery. They found a burlap sack in the Truckee River. And inside, ammunition and a submachine gun. And get this, the gun had the initials TWW engraved on it.
Hold on, a submachine gun with initials. That sounds like something straight out of a gangster movie. Was it connected to the mob?
Investigators were pretty sure it was. That type of weapon was like their go-to back then. And those
No,
initials,
we're not gonna.
like a calling card, right? Or a way to scare people. Imagine finding that thing in a river.
That's crazy. So was that it? Was that the smoking gun? Could they connect it to Babyface Nelson or anyone in his crew?
Nope. And this is where things get really frustrating. The local sheriff, instead of sending the gun off to the feds for testing, he decided to keep it. And he oiled it up, like actually tampered with potential evidence.
What? He oiled it. Why would he do that?
I know, right? It was a huge mistake. No chance of getting fingerprints or anything else useful off of it after that.
Talk about a blunder. It's unbelievable that the guy would do that.
Yeah. It was a major blow to the investigation. Whatever his reasons were, it messed up their chances of getting any good evidence from that gun. It's still sitting in the Reno Police Department today, like a reminder of how things went wrong with the case.
Wow. It's crazy that the gun is still around. But with that unreliable confession from Chase and the whole gun situation, things must have stalled. Were there any other leads?
Unfortunately, not really. Years went by, decades even, and the case went cold. The courts declared Roy legally dead in 1941, which gave his family some closure legally. But still no answers about what actually happened.
It's sad to think about. It's easy to get lost in the mystery and the detective work. But there's a real human cost to this story. His family living with that uncertainty for years.
Exactly. That grief, those unanswered questions, not being able to really say goodbye, they carried that with them for decades.
It's just heartbreaking. But then,
Oh.
out of nowhere, a new lead emerges.
Oh, yeah.
A deathbed confession that brings the case back to life.
Really? What happened?
This was in 1989, over 50 years after Roy vanished. A relative comes forward and says that his cousin confessed on her deathbed to seeing Roy's murder as a child.
Wow, so someone knew all this time but was too afraid to say anything. It just shows you the power the mob had over people back then.
It really does. So what did this cousin actually see?
She said she saw 6 men carrying lanterns and shovels, burying something big in the backyard of the Wingfield property. Remember, that's the family who owned the bank where Roy worked.
No way. So not only was he maybe killed for testifying against the mob, but they possibly buried him on the property of the people connected to the gangsters.
Yeah. It's a messed up situation. And get this, the relative said the mob threatened his cousin and her family, told them to keep quiet or else. No wonder they stayed silent for so long.
That's scary. So they finally have a specific place to search, a potential burial site. Did this new lead pan out?
It breathed some new life into the investigation for sure. The authorities went back to the Wingfield property hoping to dig up the truth. But getting onto private property after all those years,
Yeah, that can't be easy.
it was a nightmare. Legal issues, arguments over who owned the land, so much bureaucracy. It drove the investigators crazy. They were so close, but there were all these roadblocks.
So we're back, and we're picking up this incredible story of Roy Fryer. From those busy streets of Reno back in the 30s to, like, the heart of organized crime. It's been a wild ride. So many secrets, betrayals, and those big questions that still need answers.
It really makes you think, how even in a normal, everyday life, something extraordinary can happen. And this search for justice, even after all these years. It just shows how powerful the truth can be.
Absolutely. And we left off with those investigators heading to the Wingfield property, right? That deathbed confession pointed them there as a possible burial site. But you said it wasn't easy getting onto that property. What were the holdups?
Well, after so much time had passed, getting permission to search a place like that, it was a mess. Legal stuff, figuring out who even owned the land. It was a nightmare. It must have been so frustrating for those investigators. They thought they were close to finding something, but there were all these roadblocks in the way.
I bet. To have a breakthrough right there and then to run into a wall like that, it's got to be tough. So what happened? Did they ever get to search the place?
They did manage to do some investigating, took soil samples, aerial photos, even tried to use that ground-penetrating radar, to scan the property.
Right.
But before they could really dig in and do a full excavation, they lost access.
Oh, no.
It was a major setback, another delay in a case that already had so many twists and turns.
It's like taking one step forward and then 2 steps back. All that time and still no answers. So, did the case go cold again?
For a bit, it seemed that way, like the trail had gone cold. But then, a few years ago, things changed. The Wingfield property was sold.
Okay.
And these new owners, they brought a new sense of hope to the whole thing.
That sounds promising. Were the new owners open to the idea of an excavation?
Totally. They were so cooperative, they gave the investigators full access to the property. And get this, they even donated an excavator to help with the dig.
Wow, that's incredible. They went above and beyond.
It shows you, even with a story as tragic as this one, there are people who care, people willing to step up and do the right thing.
For sure. So a full-scale excavation is happening right now on the Wingfield property.
It is. It's a moment that a lot of people thought would never happen.
It's amazing what's going on with the excavation. What are they looking for?
They're using all sorts of techniques, old school archaeology stuff combined with modern technology. They've got the excavator to carefully remove layers of soil, and a team of anthropologists are going through everything, looking for any sign of human remains.
Oh, wow.
And if they do find any bones, they'll do DNA testing.
So it's like a forensic investigation, but on a site that's almost 100 years old?
It is. It takes a special kind of expertise combining those two fields. And they're comparing anything they find to the descriptions of Roy's clothing, his dental records, even DNA samples from his family, just to make sure.
It's incredible to think that after all this time, technology might finally give us some answers. What's the vibe like at the dig site? I imagine there's a lot of anticipation.
Oh, yeah, you can feel it, the weight of history. Everyone's hoping they'll finally uncover the truth. This isn't just about finding bones, it's about justice for Roy Fract and giving his family some peace after all these years.
It's a reminder that the past always has a way of coming back, doesn't it? Demands our attention, and it shows us just how powerful truth and justice really are. As we wait for the results of the dig, what do you think this case means? What can we learn from Roy Furr's story?
It's a story about power. How dangerous it can be when it goes unchecked, the reach of organized crime, and how important it is to hold those in power accountable for what they do.
Yeah.
And it also shows us how vital witness protection is. We need to protect those who are brave enough to speak out against wrongdoing. It's a lesson that's still relevant today.
It's easy to think of this as just a story from the past, right? Something that happened way back when gangsters were everywhere and justice was hard to come by. But Roy Furr's case, it reminds us that the fight for justice never really ends. It's a constant struggle, and we need to be vigilant, keep pushing for the truth no matter how hidden it might be.
And it also shows us that even the most confusing and frankly scary mysteries can be solved, even after decades of silence. All it takes is dedicated investigators, witnesses who are brave enough to come forward, and that unwavering pursuit of the truth. We may not have all the answers yet, but knowing that the search for Roy Free continues, it's comforting. It reminds us that we can learn from the past, and that search for truth. It's always worth it, no matter how long it takes.
Well said. So listeners, the big question remains. Will the Wingfield property finally reveal the secrets it's been holding for so long? We'll keep you updated. And if you're looking for more stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive. We'll be back with more captivating deep dives soon. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep with us.